Hello and welcome to Dead Woman's Ditch, which sounds like a bit of a macabre place to be, but there is a good reason why I'm here. And that is because I'm going to be giving a talk at the wonderful Shute Festival all about my novel, The Last Broomsquire, which I wrote 25 years ago. And then rewrote 14 years ago, and then have recently rewritten just very recently. And the whole novel is about this area, which is in the Quantocks, and particularly it's based on this story, which occurred right here, Dead Woman's Ditch, where a bloke called John Walford murdered his wife. That may or may not be why this is actually called Dead Woman's Ditch. That's the name you'll find on the Ordnance Survey map. And Johnny Walford did kill his young wife hundreds of years ago on the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries. And he did throw her body into a ditch somewhere up here, probably this one, which is on the very top of the Quantocks. Now, the thing is, I wrote that novel, which really doesn't sound that appealing, man murders his wife, but I wrote it all those years ago because many years before that, my old editor at the West Somerset Free Press newspaper told me the story about John Walford. The story was that when they came to hang Johnny Walford for the murder, one story was that they brought him up here to the nearest oak tree where he did the dirty deed. Just down there is a place called Walford's Oak, and that's all about poor old John getting hanged. Anyway, when the sort of militia with the cart, the caged cart carrying John Walford, reached near the Stoey, the village, which is about 3 miles in that direction, the people of that village they loved him so much and they disliked his wife a lot, and so they sort of rioted. They turned up at the edge of the village with pitchforks and what have you and said, "You can't have our boy." And then there was a bit of a standoff, and eventually the captain of the guard, he must have been quite a wise bloke, he said, "Look, we're going to have to do this, and if you stop us, you're all going to get hanged, so you're all going to be in trouble. So let's find a way out of this." And he said, "Well, why not give Johnny a last lunch in the George Inn? He can have a load of cider and a nice pasty or a ploughman's or whatever it was, and then we'll take him up and hang him." And so, to sort of save face, the village agreed to that. And old Jack Hurley, the editor of the paper, told me this story that he'd researched, and he said that all the people of the village were crowded round the pub, and inside it went completely dark because they were all pressed up against the windows, and John Walford sat in there and indeed drank his cider and ate his lunch, and eventually said he was ready. And apparently you could hear a hush as he ate this repast all alone. And then they brought him up here to Walford's Oak, just over there, where they did the dirty deed. And so the story goes that he was standing on a sort of cart that would be driven away, and then he would be left to dangle. And there were 2,000 to 3,000 people up here who'd come to see the hanging, which is an extraordinary number when you come to think about it. In those days, 2,000 to 3,000 people up here now would be remarkable. Then it must have been extraordinary. Anyway, he's standing there, and they said, "Do you have one last wish?" And he said he did, and the wish was that he wanted his childhood lover, the woman he'd loved all his life, one Anne Rice, to be brought to him so he could say a final goodbye to her. And the story goes that she was indeed brought down through the crowd, and she sort of was lifted up onto the cart at his feet, where she sort of almost fell into a swoon. John Wolford bent down and whispered something into her ear, and then eventually he stood up and said he was ready, but while he was whispering into her ear, apparently the hush was so profound, the crowd didn't make a noise, you could hear a pin drop, and legend has it that the silence was so profound that even the birds stopped singing in the trees, and the little stream just over there stopped tinkling in its riverbed. It was totally silent. It was one of those sort of metaphysically weird moments. So that when I was young, a young reporter, 17 years old, and Jack Hurley told me that story, I was pretty amazed by the visual imagery of it all. And then, of course, I was to learn that the poets Coleridge and Wordsworth were walking around these hills at the time. And then I also learned that a guy called Squire Cross, who lived a few miles in that direction, had a big manor house there. He was experimenting in electricity, and something went wrong, and he discovered little sort of creatures had grown overnight in his old Leyden jars, which are sort of an early form of battery. And the thing about that was that he sort of thought that perhaps because he was actually feeding forks of lightning, which he was gathering in the tops of trees through copper rods, he was feeding this electricity down into the Leyden jars. That's when the creatures appeared. And he thought, well, blimey, what have I done? Have I created life here somehow? Anyway, he gave lectures about that, and lots of people in the British press at the time really derided him for saying such things. But one person who attended one of his lectures was Mary Shelley, who very shortly after that went on to write Frankenstein. So the point was that you had this one thin set of hills called the Quantocks, a ridge stretching from the Vale of the Tone to the Bristol Channel coast, only 12, 13, 14 miles. But in these few years, you had all these incredible things happening. You had John Wolford murdering his wife. You had two of the world's most famous ever poets marching around here, creating fabulous works like Kubla Khan. And you had this guy who may have given rise to Frankenstein, all in 2 or 3 parishes, which sort of, to me, was an incredible thing. And I thought, well, how about if I sort of took John Wolford as a central character and told his story about how he arrived at killing his wife, and then wove in Coleridge and Wordsworth, and wove in Squire Cross. There was a lot of smuggling going on the coast just over there at the time, so threw in that as well. And, there's a novel. Well, there could be a novel. So that's what I did, and that is The Last Broomsquire. It's not the sort of book you want to read if you're a stickler for historic accuracy, but I think it's a good tale. I hope so. Have a read. Listen to the talk on Zoom or whatever it is at the Shute Festival. Hopefully it'll be good fun. Thanks for watching.